Hey guys, it is August 28th, and I want to go through some balance changes that just hit the Nexus. These are live for North America and Europe already. Let's get right into it. I've already looked this over a few times. I've talked to a few people about the possible meta implications of everything, and I just want to go over everything about that. Volskaya, it's been known to be a map that hits level 20 quite often, and especially since they made a mix of the experience changes and the changes to the Triglav and how it interacted, they are just doing a pretty major buff to the Triglav Protector. Health's being increased, health scaling's being increased, health scaling over time is being increased, starting basic attacks being increased by a decent chunk, starting damage is being increased by a decent chunk, and the percentage of bonus damage versus non-heroic targets being increased. Guys, this protector in the early game is going to destroy structures, and this protector in the late game is going to be a beast. So I think that watching the scaling of this and looking at it in game, I think the biggest thing about this that's really going to make an effect is the second objective of the game, and that's where the biggest meta change is going to be for this one. That one that's on the top area of the map. That is going to be a very heavily contested one, and I think the new meta is going to be for everyone to go collect as many items as possible, possibly even give up the first objective so that you can hold onto your items. And when you get to the second objective, try to just stay even on levels and experience. And when you get there, have your entire team filled up with items so you can win that objective. You'll be able to take a full fort with this, even if all 5 are just sitting there. And you could possibly even take a full fort, go down, and destroy the bottom area to win the next objective. The third objective on the map will likely be able to take a keep every time, and if there is ever a fourth objective, that's usually going to be game end, but I'm guessing that most games are going to be pretty close to being ended between the third and the fourth objective now. These are pretty awesome changes, and I completely agree with them. This map tended to get to high levels just because the objective was valuable, and it was hard to end without the objective. There are a lot of balance changes, so we'll try to go through them relatively quickly. I'm just going to be mentioning, you guys really liked the format that I had before. I'm going to be mentioning the change and how it's going to affect the meta. Blaze, he's getting a jet propulsion change, not necessarily a buff. He will be able to fire off his charge faster, but it will have a longer cooldown. This is going to make your stuns more reliable, but also less often. And with his cooldown increase at 16, I had one Blaze game where I was stunning every 3 to 4 seconds, and it was pretty insane. So I think that this is a really good change. Makes your stun more reliable, but makes it to where you don't hit it as often. Don't fire it as often. Pretty good change. Will it affect the meta very much? Not really. He'll still be in pretty much the same positions that he was before. A tank in very rare situations, and an offlaner in most cases in the competitive scene. I personally like him as a main tank, but I never would take him as a main tank versus most tanks, most of the meta tanks. But if I'm playing Blaze against like a Johanna, I can usually out. It's not too bad. Diablo is getting some pretty interesting change. A W buff for the level 7 W talent reduces the mana cost if you stun someone, which is kind of nice. Remember that you're going to be resetting your W with this talent, so you do burn through mana pretty fast. Diabolical Momentum is getting a buff. Remember that this talent, you don't need to attack heroes. You can attack anything. But my issue with this talent is that Diablo shouldn't really have a lot of time to auto-attack during fights. Diablo also has a problem of mana when you go this talent. I find that almost every time that I use this talent, I pick it because we might need some extra wave clear, but then I just rip through my mana so fast. So this portion of it, I mean, if they would have added the mana reduction on this, I probably would have said, let's start playing around with this talent some more, but I'm a little bit more suspicious. Level 13, huge nerf to Devastating Charge. The flat damage increase is being decreased from 80% bonus to 50% bonus, and that ability to stack that all the way up to a 200% damage bonus on his Q is being completely dropped, and now he only is going to be able to reduce the enemy's armor by 15, which means that he's going to be less reliant on blowing someone up by himself and more reliant on his team. In the highest levels of competitive, this is going to put him in a pretty similar situation to where he was before. but it will be a rather big nerf to people who are playing the Q build in solo queue, which is even more reason to go the W build that I explained earlier. And they've also buffed it with Hellfire, so you're going to be doing more damage to people when you're at max stacks, as well as this Eternal Flames buff. So W build in solo queue almost every time now. Devastating Charge only in the highest levels of competitive, where you know you're going to charge against someone against a wall, flip them over, and your team's going to follow up with you. Johanna, Reinforce is being changed. It is going from 75 armor down to 50, maybe 60. I don't really know. I'm not in game at the moment. And she's also going to be able to get her block charges a lot easier because you're going to be able to get them when you cast an ability, and you have relatively low cooldowns that can be lowered even further at level 7. So it's a decent change. Will it be meta? I don't know. It's a very contested tier. Chen, we talked about earlier how Chen is probably the best diving hero in the game right now, as he can dive and go through 3 different health bars while he's diving, and he's able to dive multiple times during a fight, making him an even better diver than people like Tracer. So they are actually nerfing all of his meta talents that I talked about. They're nerfing Eye of the Tiger, Accumulating Flame, Storm, Earth, and Fire, Ring of Fire, and Combo Strikes. So pretty much everything that I mentioned is being nerfed. But at the same time, they are buffing some underutilized talents. This should still be at 5%. I said it before, I'll say it again. It's still not good enough. Withering Flames, though, this is a pretty good talent right now. 50% damage reduction on spell damage. If you can dive in on the backline and reduce their mage's damage by 50%, you should be able to win a fight with just this alone if you're pretty good with it. So that's kind of neat. Gift of the Ox, underutilized talent. They're buffing a little bit. Storm, Earth, and Fire is getting a 20-second nerf. I think this is kind of the best way to nerf this. The ultimate is still going to be it's going to feel really good to use, but at the same time, you will only be able to use it about every other fight because it's now going to be the cooldown of Mosh Pit. Then later levels, Celerity's armor bonus is being increased. So pretty straightforward. They're nerfing his meta build. They're giving him some non-meta talents that are going to buff up. And they are nerfing his amazing dive potential. So he's only going to be able to do that like triple dive, triple health bar thing every time that like an ETC can mosh. Because it's as impactful as a mosh pit. So I think that it deserves to have the same cooldown. I really like these Chen changes in my opinion. Imperius. This is again this reminds me of Chen, where I feel like some people were playing Chen so wrong that they kept buffing Chen when he didn't need the buffs. And Imperius is the same way. I have been playing Imperius in a different build, and I've been noticing a couple competitive players playing Imperius in this new build, and there are times after level 16 and level 20 where you can wipe teams. You can fight 1v3, 1v4, and wipe people out. And I don't think people have really realized this yet. So while all of these buffs are great, once people realize this new build, they will be nerfed. I am also planning on doing a video with this new build pretty soon. And in that video, I'm pretty sure I actually do a 1v4 as well. Anyways, Valorous Brand's healing is being increased. His damage is being increased on Impaling Light. Cooldown reduction is being increased. Consuming Flame center damage is being increased. I still don't know if these are going to be as competitive as his percent health damage talent at level 1. Battle Hunger, healing is being increased. Maybe this is good if you're going against like an Arthas or someone that you don't need to rely so heavy on landing auto attacks, but more use your abilities. Anyways, Battle Hunger is being increased. Now, it's not just being increased from 50 to 60%. Remember that this increases the healing of your trait by a percentage, and your trait's also being increased. So this is a pretty large buff to this talent. Pathetic Mortals, damage reduction is being increased, and Celestial Swiftness movement speed bonus is being increased. This talent was the only one that was actually in the build that I was talking about. So the build that I'm talking about is going to be slightly buffed, but overall stand about the same. Leoric, just getting some pretty straightforward buffs. Health increase as well as some level 20 talents are being increased. Rather nice. Supports, we're seeing Medivh get a slight increase or necessarily a kind of a bug fix type thing. Where stealth people will be able to be revealed earlier. I don't think this is really going to make a change in the meta. It wasn't that picked of a talent. Leoric, he was already picked by the competitive scene, not too much by other scenes. I don't think this is going to affect him too much either. Tassadar, so this one's a little interesting. I'm going to talk about this, but they are still doing a rework on Tassadar, which means that everything here is not necessarily going to stay like that. This is all kind of just temporary to bring him back into the game a little bit before he gets reworked. Health increased, health regen increased, basic attack damage increased, distortion beam increased, slow. They're buffing an underutilized talent. They're buffing his slow. They're increasing the cooldown reduction of his trait. And this is the cooldown reduction that his trait gives to his other abilities. Correct that anyway. Physical armor reduction is being increased. And bonus damage is being increased from the max health, and prismatic link damage is being increased. So, auto attack build, auto attack build, auto attack build, and auto attack build. So, the interesting thing about this is if you did go the auto attack build, it's actually pretty strong right now. As far as the Q build and the W build, they only got slight buffs, but that is kind of interesting that we have a fun new build to play on him. Will it affect the meta at all? Probably not. I think that the highest levels of competitive will use Tassadar for the same reason they were using him before, but it might affect Storm League a little bit. We have a new possible damage dealer, a longer range Tychus, if you will. So I don't know. It's kind of cool. Auriel, bestow hope. She is getting more value from herself and less value from her team. This is just going to make her more aligned if you ever played her in solo queue. So there you go, Alex M. That's for you. Heavy burden, slow amount is being increased. There is also a couple ghost buffs. I don't really want to share them right now, only because they might have just been glitches. If they do end up coming to live, then I'll bring it up in another video. Deckard is getting a health buff, a pretty significant health and health regen buff. He's also getting some buffs to some underutilized talents. This one's still not good enough. And as far as the mana cost reduction and cooldown reduction, it's okay. I honestly think this is okay. Erazim, Heavenly Zeal, he's getting a buff. Is this going to make it better than his Q build? Probably not, honestly. Rehgar, actually, a lot of changes I really like. So a few things to note. His damage is going down a little bit. It's actually a significant damage drop, also considering that his dog bite is scaling based off of his attack. So that's going to be a nerf to this and a nerf to his possible burst. His health is being reduced by a pretty small amount, and his health regen is just lowering to compensate. But they are doing a lot of cool things with them. They're taking a lot of underutilized talents and they're shoving them into other talents. For example, Electric Charge, his W range at level 1 is now going to be healing him for 30% of the damage dealt. So while your health is lower, you can play more aggressive. Like, his damage is lower, but you get to stay in the fight longer. So that damage nerf isn't that big of a deal. His health is lower, but again, you're going to be tankier because you're going to be healing more off of your W. Allows you to have a more aggressive playstyle in the beginning of the game, but with the lower health, you still need to play safe in the later portions of the game so you don't get just bursted. Colossal Totem. More functionality, you can now move it around. So if you liked the totem build, now you can move it around. Wolf Run, a talent that I personally didn't pick a lot, but it was picked a little bit in the competitive scene. Now has a new functionality. You hit a hero with your Ghost Bite, or your Dog Bite, and you reduce the cooldown of Ghost Wolf by 1 second. So this is not the cooldown of your abilities, but just by Ghost Wolf. So it allows you to Ghost Wolf, burst them, take a step back, heal yourself, Ghost Wolf in, burst them. It's also a hero, so it won't increase camp speed, just a little bit of poke. It'll be great in the early game, not great in the late game. Totemic Projection was removed because it was moved on to Colossal Totem. Farsight's removed, which is kind of sad. I had a little game that I was going to have people play that was snipers and spotters. So I was going to have Ana. Both teams would have an Ana, both teams would have a Rehgar, and the Rehgars would run around using totems and Farsight for vision. And if one of the other Rehgars showed up, the Anas would snipe them, and then that team would win. So it was just kind of a fascinating little game. We won't be able to do it as effectively without Farsight, unfortunately. Not a big deal, though. We could do it with like Rexar or whatever. New talent, Grounded Totem. Increase the health of Earthbind Totem by 100%. Enemy heroes who are slowed by Earthbind Totem also have their attack speed slowed. This competes with Cleanse, but against the right teams, this could be pretty interesting. You're going against an Illidan, 40% attack speed slow on a really big size because you can increase the size of it by taking that level 1 talent, is going to be huge. You effectively reduce his damage and his healing. So against Illidans, this could be a death sentence. And remember, we also can move it around. So even if they try to move around a little bit, you can permanently reduce their attack speed by 40%, which is pretty cool. Bloodlust is getting a 50% buff in range and a buff in movement speed. I think this is pretty cool. Will it make it better than Ancestral? I think for some situations, yes. But for most situations, no. Stukov, Flailing Swipe is getting a buff. Controlled Chaos is getting a buff. I would say still pick him in the same situations you'd pick him in before. If you're going against multiple frontliners, Flailing Swipe, or multiple divers, Flailing Swipe. In any other situation, just push the one person away. Push their one tank away so that they fight without a tank, or push the one diver away so you guys don't need to worry about him for that fight. Tyrande is getting a lot of, like I said with other heroes, they are buffing underutilized talents and nerfing the most meta talents out there. Loon's getting a pretty good nerf, and then we're getting a buff out of Mark of Mending and Everlasting Light. Mark of Mending's always been one of those talents that it's busted if you pick it with like a Diva that attacks really fast or a Zarya that attacks really fast, but it's been pretty bad outside of that. Everlasting Light was already a decent talent. It just wasn't as good as Loon's Chosen, so seeing as the Loon's is being nerfed a little bit, we may see Everlasting sneak in. Ranger is being buffed a little bit. True Shot's being buffed a little bit. This really won't do anything for the highest levels of competitive, but it might be some fun talents to play around with outside of that. Huntress Fury has been moved down from level 16. Let me just pull this up really quick so we can see which talent that was, because I'm not 100% sure. Level 16, Huntress Fury, increase the cast range and duration of Hunter's Mark. And your basic attacks against that will splash to nearby enemies. So instead of one of your heal talents, you can have the choice of having splash damage, which is okay. It's not bad. Is it better than having it to where your heal's reduced on more auto attacks or spell armor? I don't know. Maybe. Ranger's Mark, basic attacks against marked targets no longer increase the duration of Hunter's Mark, but now they will reduce the cooldown of Lunar Flare by 1.5 seconds, which is your stun. Is that better than slowing them and reducing their damage? It honestly could be. Firing off multiple stuns during a fight can be game-changing, and I even have had a lot of points where after level 20, I will sit at 7 stacks on my Lunar Flare, or on my Shooting Stars talent, and then right as the team fight starts, I will stun one person, auto-attack once so I can double stun them, and that's pretty much all you ever need to kill someone, even a tank. So the fact that you can get 2 or 3 more stuns off during a team fight could be game-changing. I think this talent might be picked up in the competitive scene. Celestial Attunement, her cleanse is being moved to level 16. It is not as good as Karazim's Cleansing Touch. I'm really surprised that they're doing that, but it is still a really good talent and a good hero. So that is probably necessary for them to do that. It also is competing with the percent health talent. I would say it almost will always be better than the percent health talent, especially since now it doesn't compete with the lower cooldown talent at level 7. So you could effectively have a much lower cooldown cleanse. And so that's not, I mean, it will be a nerf in the early stage of the game, especially against heroes that have really strong roots, or CC anyways. But it's gonna be a tricky one, or stuns, I mean, not. But yeah, either way. Alarak, I talked about how busted these talents were. I did a video about it. It became the meta build for so long. They're nerfing it. But they are buffing Hindered Motion, which is a talent that I've always thought was pretty cool, just not necessarily better than the other talent on that tier. So I'd like to see that that's getting a buff. Murky is getting 2 buffs on talents that I have no idea really what these do. Just bonus spell damage and bonus damage, both quests. I personally don't see a lot of Murky, so I don't know how this is going to affect the meta. Someone can answer that in the Qhira. I've mentioned before that I think with Qhira, they either needed to nerf her damage or nerf her survivability. If they nerf her damage, she could just be a bruiser in the top lane. If they nerf her survivability, then she can be a 4-man melee assassin. And what they decided to do was nerf her survivability. And like other heroes, they are also buffing underutilized talents and nerfing the overpowered talents. So let's talk about it. Decrease health, decrease escape. They're leaving her damage, her base damage, the same. The slow is being increased, underutilized talent. The quest is being harder to complete on W, as well as the bleed damage is being reduced. The bonus bleed damage, anyways, still is probably going to be the best talent on this tier. Finishing Touch is getting a slight buff and duration buff, which is kind of nice. Ensnaring Swing, I always thought this was a solid talent, but they're giving it a pretty significant buff. Healmonger, again, they're nerfing her survivability, so that's going to be nerfed. Unrelenting Strikes, they're buffing not enough, and Final Strike, they're nerfing not enough. So it'll still be Final Strike for most situations. Yes, I said in the PTR I predicted this would be good, but sometimes things on paper are not as good in practice. So this ult is just pretty easy to get away from, pretty easy to stun her. If they made it go faster, if they made it a lower cooldown, cool. But Final Strike's a low cooldown, pretty easy to land, deals a lot of damage. Zeratul, Shroud of Adun, after they made Wormhole, that Wormhole nerf, he can't really stay in for very long. Giving him a buff to survivability is really nice. Chromie is getting some buffs on underutilized talents. One of the lowest win rates. Both of these talents actually were brought up on Reddit recently for really low win rate, low utilization. Pretty much is outclassed by everything else, so they are getting some buffs. Mobius Loop is getting a buff, here and there is getting a buff, Fast Forward is getting a buff, and this is a talent that might end up changing the meta a little bit. We remember when it initially came out, it was busted, and then they nerfed it, and now they're buffing it again. Maybe they're putting it back to a point where it could be really good. Is this going to make her a meta first pick by any means? No. Will it bring her back into the meta a little bit? Yeah, I think so. Gul'dan, I want to talk about this for like 30 minutes, but I'm not going to. Rain of Destruction's cooldown is being reduced to the point where you could use it for fighting over just about any camp fight and still have it available for the next objective. You can also utilize this for pushing whenever you're pushing or defending whenever you're defending. It's also small enough that it makes me wonder, the cooldown's low enough, it makes me wonder if this is going to be something. Now, Darkness Within, let's talk about this talent. It's going to do something completely different than what it did before. Now, if you do 600 damage to an enemy hero, it makes it to where your next life tap is going to cost no health and give you 25% spell power. So what does that mean? That means if you land 2 Qs, you get a free life tap. Meaning if you just land your Qs, you'll have infinite mana. And you get spell power, which is pretty good. Not just that, but if Rain of Destruction and you get a nano boost, you get enough extra damage that as long as 2 of those meteors are hitting people, you're going to get a free life tap, which is going to increase your damage, your spell damage by even more, making it easier and easier and easier to keep getting life taps. Combine Rain of Destruction with something like an Earthquake to keep people locked in place, or Rain of Destruction on a map where people have to sit on a point. This could actually come back as a possibility to sneak ahead of Horrify on certain maps or certain situations, especially with the power of Darkness Within increasing the damage of your rain by 25%. Anywho, most likely in the competitive scene, we're still going to see Horrify, but I do think this is going to make Rain of Destruction better in solo queue most of the time. Hanzo, Explosive Arrow nerf, and is pretty much going to make him a lot harder to pick in the competitive scene. Dragon Strike buff is still easy to walk away from. Mounted Archery, again, there's still another great talent at that tier, and Dragon's Awakens gets nerfed a little bit because of the buff here. I don't think this is really going to affect Hanzo for most people to play him, but the competitive scene might look twice into it because his Q build in BOE was pretty incredible, and now it's not going to be enough splash damage to steal away everything. Zod, they're reducing his burst a little bit and giving him more utility. He still has enough burst that he can burst down 2 people at once if you're hitting something like 2 assassins, 2 ranged assassins, and or a healer and a ranged assassin. But it's not high enough anymore to where you can take out bruisers. But your CC tends to be a lot higher now. Li-Ming, better scaling on Q, and they've rearranged your talents a little bit. Astral Presence still isn't good enough in my opinion. Seeker is increased damage. Zai's Vengeance, not good enough in my opinion. Disintegrate and Glass Cannon. Let's talk about the Glass Cannon, Disintegrate, and the Seeker. Oh, hold on. Let's talk about these talents for a second. There is a build that's been growing in popularity lately of a sustained damage Li-Ming. And it's all about just doing more damage over time and not relying on your resets. And it relies on Qs, auto attacks, and in many cases Glass Cannon, or they go the auto attack one if the enemies have divers. And it's kind of fascinating because they have been buffing the Q talents. They've been buffing these things. Is this going to make that build come out ahead? Maybe, honestly. So we'll have to check that out. But there is yeah. Tychus, some pretty cool changes to his level 1s. They're just kind of buffing all of them flat. The new functionality on Dash increases the range run gun as well as gives you movement speed. So it just kind of combines those 2 talents that were there. The Press the Advantage is his increased attack range And Combat Tactician, I actually really like this one. Casting Run and Gun reduces the cooldown of Minigun by 8 seconds. And that also is still going to do the other effect of decreasing the cooldown of your E as well. I actually think this can be a really powerful talent if it's what it sounds like it is. This probably will beat the other talents, especially with Bigger They Are, being able to reduce the cooldown by 8 seconds, and then have Bigger They Are that reduces the cooldown of Minigun already by an extra 3. If those stack, I mean, what's your cooldown then on Minigun? Like 4 seconds or something? Like, you should be able to, or be 5 seconds? I mean, being able to drop 70% of someone's health every 5 seconds is insane. So, pretty cool. Valla, Caltrops, mana cost reduction. They just are trying to make her mana a little bit more reasonable, but it's not really a meta talent, so I don't know how much it's going to help with that. Bug fixes, and there we go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, this is the new style where I go through the heroes, talk about how it's going to affect the meta, and I think a lot of these changes are pretty interesting. I'm the most excited for the Rehgar changes, but I also do like the balance changes that I did for Chen and Qhira. I don't think either of them are permaban status anymore, but yeah, overall, pretty good. Let me know what you guys thought about any of the changes down below. Was there anything that you expected that you didn't see? Was there anything that you just really like to see? And what do you guys, is there certain ones that you just want to immediately jump into? Thank you guys again, and feel free to check out my other videos.